All right, you guys. Nervous system regulation has become a trend and a buzzword all across social media in the last couple of years. And as someone who's worked with hundreds of high-performing individuals, helping them regulate their nervous system so they can get out of their own way and actually break through whatever ceiling it is they feel stuck at, something that I'm always surprised by when it comes to the content on nervous system regulation is how much content focuses on how to regulate your nervous system in the short term versus how much content talks about how you can maintain that state of nervous system regulation over time. Our nervous system is the system that is responsible for our self-sabotaging patterns, which means if you're someone who is driven and ambitious, but for whatever reason keeps finding yourself procrastinating or not doing what you know you need to do in order to achieve the goal that you're working towards, it's likely not because you lack discipline. It's likely because there's something going on in your nervous system that isn't allowing you to feel safe and to feel regulated when it comes to that goal and the actions you need to take to get there. And while short breathing exercises or meditations are great to bring you down to that calm or de-stressed state in the moment, rarely do they work for more than an hour or so before you find yourself back in that same stressed out state, self-sabotaging whatever it is you're working towards again. Which is why I want to take this video to actually explain the science behind nervous system regulation and why it's so important, as well as give you some strategies to actually regulate your nervous system in the long term. Let's get into it. Now, first, we have to understand that one of the primary objectives of our nervous system is to keep us safe and maintain a state of homeostasis or balance in the body. And it does this by navigating between two main systems, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, our sympathetic nervous system is the portion of our nervous system that's responsible for our stress responses. This is the system that is associated with the term fight or flight, and it's also the system that our body jumps into whenever there is a trigger or a stressor in our life that we need to kind of reroute all of our resources to so that we can really focus on it and keep ourselves safe. This system is the one that's always compared to us being chased by a tiger, and how if we were being chased by a tiger, all of our resources and energy in our body would go towards us running and getting away from that tiger. That means functions in our body like digestion or sex drive are typically going to get turned off in that state so that we can reroute that energy to the primal concern, keeping ourselves safe, keeping ourselves alive. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. This is the state that we want to be in on a moment-to-moment basis. The parasympathetic nervous system is associated with the term rest and digest, and what that means is that it's really responsible for a lot of the involuntary functions of the body. These are things like our creativity, but also our digestion and our sex drive and our sleep. The parasympathetic nervous system is really important because it's when we are in that parasympathetic nervous system is that our body can heal itself, we can take action to the things we actually want to in life, and that we actually feel safe in that moment. When we talk about nervous system regulation, we typically get this idea that the sympathetic nervous system is bad. It's high stress, high cortisol, and that is hurting us. But in truth, the real problem isn't the sympathetic nervous system. It's that we cannot regulate between the two different nervous systems at the correct rate. On a normal basis, if we are at a parasympathetic nervous system state and a trigger or stressor comes into our life, we want our body to regulate into that sympathetic nervous system state. Even if it's not a tiger chasing us, that state is actually helpful for our ability to complete whatever it is we need to complete in that moment. What's a problem is when we go into the sympathetic nervous system state, but the trigger we just experienced actually is gone and gone for quite a while, and we cannot regulate from this state back down to a parasympathetic state fast enough. This is where a lot of the actual problems we experience when it comes to nervous system regulation come from. Not the sympathetic nervous system, but our ability to go from the parasympathetic nervous system to the sympathetic nervous system quickly. Now, when you're in work and you're triggered by an email and your heart rate speeds up and you start overthinking and you're trying to breathe slowly so that you can actually calm yourself down back into that parasympathetic state, the reason that doesn't last more than an hour or so is because most of us have regulated over time to an almost constant state of being in that sympathetic nervous system, that stressed out place. The problem with this is that our body has essentially adjusted to a new baseline of constantly being stressed out, on edge, and afraid something is going to happen. And while this is good to have in moments because it allows us to keep ourselves safe, we've probably started to associate too many things with danger, and therefore we can never truly get out of it because our entire world around us feels like danger to our body. From a health perspective, this is really dangerous because it's going to affect your sleep, your sex drive, your digestion, reaction. And from a professional standpoint and overall fulfillment in life, it's also really dangerous. You're going to constantly be sabotaging whatever it is that you want because nothing feels safe to you. Now, the reason this happens actually comes back to a much bigger and deeper topic, which is trauma. Trauma at a very, very high level is when we experience something in the past that evokes an emotional reaction, but we don't have the resources, or we don't feel safe enough, or we don't know how to fully process that emotional reaction in that moment. Whenever we experience an emotion, it opens an emotional loop, and we go from this kind of calm state of being to experiencing that emotion, be it sadness or anger or frustration. And once we let ourselves really feel that emotion, what typically happens is we reach this peak of the emotion, and then the emotion starts to subside naturally, and we go back to that balanced state we were in. This is the homeostasis, that balance that our nervous system is always seeking to experience. When we experience trauma, we open the emotional loop, but we never get to close it because we either don't have the resources to experience the emotion to the fullest, we don't feel safe enough to do that, we don't know how to do that, and therefore that emotion actually gets stored in our body and causes us to kind of live on this constant state of being on edge. Because what if there is a trigger or a situation that causes us to feel that pain again? Our body is then constantly on edge because it doesn't want to re-evoke that feeling, and therefore we live for more of that heightened state where we're always a little on guard, afraid, and not feeling fully safe. So when you're struggling to reach a long-form state of nervous system regulation, it's typically not because the exercises you're doing in the moment aren't working. Your nervous system has too high of a level of moments in the past that it's still holding on to pain from, and too many triggers that it's afraid of re-experiencing and living out again, that it can't feel safe even when you do breathe and calm yourself down for a couple of minutes. That's why when we talk about regulating our nervous system for the long term, we start to actually have to look at some of the traumas that we've experienced and how can we heal them, and how can we start to allow our body and our nervous system to feel safe with some of the triggers that right now it does not feel safe with, and are constantly triggering it back up into that sympathetic state. Now, this is obviously a bit more complicated than doing a couple of deep belly breaths while you're sitting at your desk. That being said, one of the most effective ways that I have found in healing trauma and healing your nervous system overall is in breath work. Not breathing exercises, but breath work. Let me explain. Our breath is one of the very few ways that we can access both the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And what that means is that when we know the proper techniques in how to regulate between each system and intentionally activate each system, we can actually use our breath to intentionally access all of those triggers and those traumas that are causing our nervous system to operate at that heightened sympathetic state. Now, when we do this correctly and we apply the right techniques for our breath, we can actually temporarily lower the amount of activity in our prefrontal cortex just due to the different levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our bloodstream. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that's responsible for logic and reasoning, and it's oftentimes where we notice a lot of overthinking. This is also the part of our brain that tends to shut down some of our emotional responses when the pain or the emotion gets too big for us. So when we apply these techniques and we intentionally activate the sympathetic nervous system and access some of these triggers and traumas that are stored while lowering that level of activity in our prefrontal cortex, it puts our body in a state where we can open, close, and heal some of those old emotional cycles and loops that have been causing us to operate at the more stressed out sympathetic state for a while now. This is where knowing the difference between different breathing techniques and how they actually interact with your body and your brain and how long you need to do them and in what state you need to do them is so important, because the real success when it comes to healing trauma from a technique like this really comes from how you do it and how safe you feel while doing it. This is also why a lot of high-performing people find this technique so effective and have had such great results with it, because when we actually physiologically know what we're doing with our body, when our brain isn't able to override what we're doing and stop us from healing ourselves. So if you're someone who experiences a high level of self-sabotage and it feels like no amount of ambition or drive ever is really enough for you to see the outcome you are looking for, or maybe you're just stuck in a place in your life or a time in your life where the current goal that you're working towards is just a lot more difficult and causing you a lot more internal strife or internal battling than other goals have in the past, it's probably because there's a level of nervous system regulation that needs to happen around this goal so your nervous system feels safe to overcome that. And that means we have to come back and actually address what are those triggers, what are those traumas that are causing your nervous system to not feel safe with the goal you're working towards, and how can we use the breath or other techniques to actually heal those at the root so you don't have to do little short breathing exercises all day, every day in order to get anything done. This is also why knowing how to heal something at the root and do the bulk of the work in the beginning is so much more effective than spot treating as you go, because when we actually can do all of the work and address the root cause of why you are sabotaging or why you're stuck or why you're dysregulated in the first place, you won't have to deal with all of the other symptoms that have constantly come up from that place. This is my specialty, and I've been doing this work for over 4 years now. So if you are interested in nervous system regulation or how you can do this for yourself, I'll leave a link below for how you can work with me. And if you just want a taste of what I mean by a more extended form of breathwork, I'll leave a daily breathwork track below as well that you can access for free. This is a great practice, not for you to heal your trauma, but for you to see just how much your breath can do for you. And obviously, if you have any questions or want me to talk more in depth on anything that I talked about in this video, just leave a comment below and I will do so in the next video. Bye.